This is your real estate syndication show, and on this episode, I hope you enjoy where I am being interviewed on someone else's podcast.
What is up, everybody, and welcome back to the Abundant Journey podcast. As always, I'm your host, Nick James, and grateful that you guys are hanging out with us today. A show that is dedicated to teaching entrepreneurs how to grow, how to scale, how to keep going when things are tough. And man, today we have a special episode. Nick, I tend to say that a lot, but I think today truly is a special episode. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so. Our guest today has really inspired us starting the podcast here. And I remember even before we'd recorded a single episode, you were like, we've got to get this guy on. So you could say that this has been a year and a half in the making coming to this point. So I'll turn it. Nick, you can do the full introduction, but yes, I know both you and I have been looking forward to this one for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we have Whitney Sewell hanging out with us today. Whitney, how are you, sir?
I am excellent. Honored to be here, guys.
Oh, man, we're grateful that you would come and hang out with us today. For those of you who don't know Whitney, he is owner and founder of LifeBridge Capital, a multifamily syndication business. I think at this point, probably over 400 million in assets that you guys are managing with different real estate. On top of that, though, I don't know if they've been really in the real estate space for a while, your face and your voice is out there because you've done over 2,000 episodes on your daily real estate syndication show, right?
That's right.
Man, so you have been busy, but we kind of alluded to it, the fact that we've been wanting to get you on for a while. And the reason is because a few years ago, I heard you speak on a Bigger Pockets episode and you shared your story. And at that point, man, I was like, one, I got to meet this guy. And two, your story inspired. And then you and I hopped on a call a couple years ago and you were like, hey, you should start a podcast. And so here we are. We're still going strong. So Whitney, let me ask you this and jump in. Again, I've heard your story. I absolutely love that episode on Bigger Pockets. And I would say for those of you who haven't heard it, go back and check that out because there's so many good nuggets in there. But for those of you who aren't familiar with your story, tell us a little bit about who you are, what your backstory is, and what got you doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, I appreciate the intro and love hearing that the Lord used me in some way to inspire someone else and love what you all are doing through this podcast as well. So for me, it started in March of 2001, and I had no idea the decisions that I was making that month, how it was going to change the rest of my life. Ultimately, I joined the military and I joined the National Guard. I was still in high school at the time, and I had no idea that 6 months later, obviously our nation was going to be attacked. Shortly after, I would find myself spending a year in Iraq, and just many events there obviously has changed my life. And the Lord, man, just had a bigger plan, right, than I could see. Unfortunately, not everyone in my squad made it home. And so just many life lessons, right, that, man, the Lord has used. And so thank the Lord I was able to make it home safely. Shortly after, I started working for Kentucky State Police. I was one of 5 hires out of like 1,200 applicants, and I was blessed to have a position there. I loved the uniform, the discipline, the structure, and really the service. I loved being the first person on a scene, or say an accident, and and being able to help those people out of that vehicle or whatever it may be. Right? I loved doing that. However, I got married a couple years in. I would have done it for free the first couple of years. I would have. Not everywhere do you get to drive like that for a purpose, and it just have a lot of fun. It's not all fun. Also, I'll tell you that. But those guys and gals that serve, man, I just hats off to them. It's a very difficult job for very little pay. But so a couple years in, got married, and then the reality hit me that, okay, wow, it's going to be hard to support a family on $28,000 a year. What can we do to help supplement my income? I really felt like I didn't have any college background, and it made me feel helpless almost. It's like, what else can I do? I grew up in a one-stoplight town, very small town mindset. And what am I qualified to do? I thought the uniform, the service, that's what I would be doing forever. But if we could just make like $200 extra a month, that would have been a big deal. I was exposed to the thought of rental property somehow. But then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it was like, okay, if this many people have built wealth in real estate, we should be able to have like 200 extra bucks a month through some rentals or something, right? We can do something. So we bought a couple triplexes, made a ton of mistakes. I mean, I have so much brain damage still, I think, from those units, those 6 units, But I tell you, I don't share this often, but one of my biggest regrets from that time is that we bought those really, I think within the first year of marriage. I feel like I missed a lot of time with my new bride because it just consumed me mentally, right? Like there was so much deferred maintenance. It was not the best part of town. I'm dealing with tough tenants. A lot of lessons learned on that front, but I feel like the biggest loss is the time with my new bride. And so any young guys out there or gals that are just getting married, like enjoy that time, right? You can go build a real estate business, sometime, but man, you can't get that time back. But we did. We bought 2 triplexes. And then shortly after, I met a guy who was a federal agent, and I didn't even know this position existed. He helped me through the hiring process of becoming a federal agent, which is not easy. That brought us to Virginia, where we live now. I did that for almost 10 years. But during that process, within just a few years, I again hit a ceiling. I was going to have to move all over the country to be able to promote. And my wife and I determined it's just not worth it, not what we wanted for our family. We were so connected with our church where we live that we didn't want to leave. We didn't want to move. And we, within a week, actually, I'm sorry. With that weekend that we moved here, we heard a pastor talk about adoption and how they had adopted and exposed us to 150 million orphans in the world. This was brand new information. My wife and I were still newly married, never talked about adoption before. And on our way home from this event, all we could do was ask ourselves, why would we not adopt? It seemed like the right thing to do. And I'm really thankful for our ignorance in the process, right? Or we may not have done it. Within a week, we applied to adopt from Ethiopia. 2 years later, our first son, Samuel, comes home from Ethiopia. 10 months later, our second son, Elijah, comes to our family through adoption. A few years later, Eden Joy, our daughter, who's almost 5, or just turned 5, actually, came to our family through adoption. We now have another daughter, Selah, who's 11 months, who came to our family through adoption as well. So the Lord had a big plan here. I mean, it's just an emotional roller coaster, financial roller coaster as well, going through the adoption process. If you're not familiar, 50 to 70 grand, unfortunately, often to go through the process of bringing your child home. And so, but what started happening is my wife and I wanted to help other families to be able to adopt. It was very difficult for us early on financially to make that happen. But years into living in Virginia, we were about to start our 3rd adoption process. I was actually training horses professionally as well. While I was a federal agent, which makes sense, right? Real estate success comes from most people train horses to get there, right?
That's right.
But it was just a passion of mine since I was little. But again, Chelsea and I were walking on the beach one fall, and we were just praying and just seeking the Lord, and like what we're doing is what we're doing now ultimately going to get us where we need to go 3, 5, even 10 years. And the obvious answer was no, absolutely not. And so our boys were really young at the time, and I was ultimately missing everything with them. I mean, it's a big price to pay, right? As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a startup, most can relate, right? You're working just all the time, right? And I was federal agent and training horses at this time. And I would literally get home, load the horses, go to the arena, give lessons, train our own horses, get back home at midnight. I mean, it was just this crazy cycle. Yeah. But we were walking on the beach, and we just decided, you know what? If we're gonna do something different, if we're going to be different than everybody else, if we're going to be able to give in big ways, if we want to be able to help a lot of people, if we want to keep adopting, we got to make some decisions that other people are not willing to make. Yeah. And it was crazy to everybody, including our family, even our church family that really loves us, right? We're really like thinking there's something wrong at the Sewell household, because what we did next was sell the farm. And we literally came home. This was September. And between Christmas and New Year's, we are moving out of our farm. And really a house that all of our family and church family would have thought was a dream to have, right? And so, but we knew we had to make decisions that others are not willing to make. And that's ultimately what we did. And so that's when the commercial real estate business started. That's when Omna started, the foundation that we started that helps families adopt. And that this Omna, the Omna Foundation is really the mission behind LifeBridge, right? Is to help other families to be able to bring their children home and get past the financial burden of adoption. So many years later, like you said, 400 million in assets. It's been a crazy ride of just how the Lord has allowed us to meet people and brought people in our path and partners and capital and all these things to help us to grow quickly. But I'll stop there and let you ask some questions. But it's a long journey, but it's been in a short period of time, I feel like.
It's such an amazing journey of all of these threads, that seem so disparate, but they're coming together from military background, police, horses, real estate. One of the things that we talk about a lot on this show, and I think it's good to just get right into it, there's so much of a push towards hustle culture in today's day and age. And a lot of our listeners are folks that are kind of new in their entrepreneurial journey. Maybe they're real estate investors, bought that first triplex, put in a bunch of time and everything into it. It's really refreshing to hear you talk about the cost of doing those things, especially when it comes to your family. And so, I'd love to maybe hear you speak to that just a bit more. What's some of the advice that you're seeing out there that perhaps relates to hustle culture, that you hear it and it kind of makes your stomach turn based upon your own experience?
Yeah. Often I get the question, obviously about commercial real estate and growing quickly and going big and all those things. And one connection to that is people say, should I start a daily podcast? And my first question, and you could relate this to a number of aspects of business and whatnot, but is, are you married? Do you have kids? And if the answer to either of those is yes, I say probably not. It's probably not worth doing a daily podcast. And what I love to share though is that our mission of helping families to adopt is something that my whole family could get behind. Right. I didn't plan it that way. The Lord had a purpose there and had a plan. And I don't take credit for having that, or coming up with that. But it was something that when we started the business, we were renting a house in town and I was traveling all over the country to conferences as hard as I could go, but I was still working full time. And I would be off work every other Monday. And I built a team of virtual assistants that would that helped produce the podcast, but they knew they had to have 12 to 15 interviews scheduled for me back to back to back on those days. And so just to give you a vision here for it was chaos. And we were in another adoption process. We had a failed placement, so we lost about 30 grand. I mean, it was just madness. But our mission is what I feel like kept my wife and I focused, and together. One thing that was very important for us at that time, and we still do it to this day, but is being up early and having that quiet time with the Lord, but also together. And so it's a time for us to be able to connect. It's a time to be able to pray. It's a time to be able to read our Bibles and seek the Lord in these decisions. But during that time specifically, outside of that hour or so, it was chaos, right? I mean, it was just chaos. And so it's something that's you just really have to question, hey, where's my focus? Where you spend your time is what matters to you, right? Like we know, it is known that there's a significantly higher divorce rate amongst CEOs. Right. Or business owners and like we know that just because of the demands and the isolation really on those roles as well. Or just the high stress levels, whatnot. But you have to, and I didn't do this very well early on, and I still don't feel like I am. But it's a constant battle of, hey, am I still focused at home? Am I focused on being as successful at the dining room table as I am at the boardroom table? Right? Like that's what I've come to recently, and there's some specific things I'm trying to do around that, which I'm happy to share. But man, don't forget what's most important, right? It's those relationships that are going to matter the most, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Guess what? It's you started building those foundations many years before, right? And that's a big thing. That's a big reason why, we decided to sell the farm, because I was missing everything with our young boys, at the time. And it was like, we've got to do something different.
I love that recognition because oftentimes the why we talk about here, even on the show, how the why is the thing that should be greatest and a greater reason than making money and building businesses. But then even the next layer of that is, well, the why can't supersede what really is most important: the faith, the family, the kids, the needs, and that recognition that you and Nick, you say this often, but each of us as being fathers, we have a specific role in the lives of our kids that nobody else on the earth can fulfill that role. And so don't lose sight of that in business. I think that's huge. I want to go back just a little bit, Whitney. One thing you said was that as you were beginning this journey, everybody kind of looked on and said, well, you have the dream both with military and police and government role, and then you have the farm, but yet you recognized in your family that we would have to do something that most people would be afraid to do. And I think there's a lot of people who sit on the sidelines and don't jump into something maybe they're passionate about or called to, or something that they know will further their family, further, push them further than they've ever gone. And so I want you to talk a little bit more to that and speak to somebody on the sidelines, because, I think we get comfortable, we get complacent, and then we coast. But yet for you guys, there was that catalyst that pushed you over the edge. So what did you have to become in order to make that jump? Was it simply a pain point? Or for you guys, really, what pushed you into the fear of the unknown?
The fear, you can look at that a couple different ways, right? The fear of the unknown of what the future is. But man, think about the fear of if you just stay where you're at. Right.
Yeah.
Think about the fear of if you just stay where you're at. And looking back now, I'm just so thankful for how the Lord, had a plan, right, and brought us out of that federal position. Like from what I know now, like I probably would have. I wouldn't have still been working there just because of different things that have happened in our country and whatnot. But I didn't see that then, right? And the Lord had a plan and protected us. But selling the farm was hard. I mean, people thought that there's some bad things happening, in our household, and people that love us literally would, come pull me aside and say, is everything okay? And because to them, it just seemed crazy, right? You got this federal position that seems so secure, right? And, such great retirement and benefits and all these things. However, that's not the way we saw it finally. It was like, wait a minute. No, I feel like there's more that we can do. And now is the time. And so you have to think about too, like, what's the worst that can happen here? We live in America. Even if we lose everything and we did lose our home, guess what? We're probably going to sleep somewhere tonight, on a bed and, have food. And obviously we don't want that to happen, but I'm just saying, like, if you don't take what most people see as a big risk, if you don't take that risk, then you can't move forward. You can't succeed. You can't grow. And in that risk and in that fear is where you really grow. Right. And that's what I experienced finally at that time. Like I started reading and even a few years before we sold the farm, I read, I wasn't a big reader before, unfortunately. But I read a book about our Miracle Morning, right? You've probably heard about that. Hal Elrod, right? I think it's his name. It made me think about, wait a minute. Like, how am I spending this time? I don't go by everything in that book, but still, it made me question about how am I using my morning time? Like, am I being purposeful? And I wasn't. But it led me on a path to being very intentional with my mornings. And I started reading more and started educating, and it inspired me. And I read about other people who had done these things. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. If all these people can do it, I can do it too. Right. And then I started going to conferences, and I'm like, these people are buying 100-unit complexes, and they've only been in the business a year or two. Like I just assumed that anybody that was doing that had been in the business 20 or 30 years. Right. So I thought, wait a minute, if they can do it, I can figure this out too. Right. And so it just set us on a path of changing what we thought about risk and what we thought really the vision for what we thought we could do. And then just saying, hey, if we don't, we either try now or we're just not going to do it. And so let's just go all in, and literally had to sell the farm so I knew that I personally would be all in on this goal.
Yeah. I love that going all in. I mean, it kind of reminds me that common concept now of burning your ships, and it's good too. I appreciate you talking about figuring out, okay, worst case scenario, what's going to happen, and because I think that when we don't answer that question, our minds tend to go to darker places than what's reality. We are so fortunate here in America. It sounds like with family support and everything that you've got too, it helps keep your mind from catastrophizing everything. If you know, hey, at the end of the day, like there's going to be food to eat, there's going to be a bed to sleep in, we're going to be able to figure it out. I'd love to talk more, though, about that figuring it out process. I think for a lot of folks, there's limiting beliefs and they just don't have like the plausibility structure for what they could accomplish. And so I'd love to hear about that transformation for you as you started to get into the room with people that were doing those big real estate syndications, how the horizons of possibility shifted for you, and even what it started to look like to get into some of your first real big deals.
You hit the nail on the head when you said getting in bigger rooms. And it was about surrounding myself with people who had bigger visions than I did. Right? Like I never thought that was an option for me. Right. To ever think about, being a millionaire or owning a 100-unit complex or much less, 1,600 units and, however many hundreds of millions of real estate later. I never, that wasn't even a thought, right? I could not imagine that. But once I started surrounding myself with other people that were doing it, I was like, wait a minute, like that. Well, if they can do it, I can figure this out. Right. I can figure this out too. And so that has been a constant journey as well. Early on, it's meeting these people and my vision expanding, right, for the possibilities of what is out there. But then it's finding the right people for mentorship, finding the right people that say, hey, wait a minute, I want to look like that guy or gal when I grow up, ultimately in my business, but also in my family. Right. I want to find people. I knew early on, hey, I want to find people that not only are really good at business and successful, but are they also successful at home? Right? Is that still important to them? Or, do they really care about my success? Or, how do they lead outside of their business? And I'm just thinking about all those things as I am looking for mentorship. And even today, I still look for those people, right? I'm looking for people that are way ahead of me and trying to get into those rooms. And now, now I pay more for being in those rooms than I used to make in a year, right? I mean, it's because I know the value of those relationships. I was in a mastermind probably 6 years ago that at the time I wasn't sure if there would be any value from. But since then, there's been numerous people partner with us, want to partner with us because of those relationships that were built, many, many years ago. Right. And so it has been so much about who I've surrounded myself with, but even the books that I started to read that helped me to commit to think, oh, wait a minute, to thinking bigger and encouraging me that I could do it. Right. Or obviously the Lord just opened a ton of doors as well. But it was exposing, my mind to a bigger vision than what I had before. And it wouldn't have been done without being in the right rooms.
I think that's huge. And I want to go a little further on that, on the granular practical level, because I think I do remember, I think your first deal you ever did was like a $30 million deal or something like that. And so getting in the room was essential and being surrounded by those right people. But maybe for somebody listening, what are some practical things that you either did early on or have since learned because you've been in the room with some incredible people? How would somebody even go about starting that sort of a journey?
Yeah. The first deal my business partner and I did was $20 million. And a $20 million project. It's hard to believe thinking back, it's like, how did we raise the money? Where did that come from? But just to clarify too, I did not come from a high net worth family or network. I had no network of high net worth people. A lot of people come into the business because they come from a background as a doctor or engineer, or they have this network of high net worth people already. I did not. And so for me, I think it was as simple as, I see what other people are doing, that are successful or what they did. I'm just going to go do it. Like I just know if I keep doing this thing, like I'm just consistent, right? And I just keep going, I'm eventually going to meet the right people. I'm eventually going to be able to raise money. So I started networking as hard as I could go. I was going to every conference all over the country I could possibly go. I was shaking every hand I could possibly shake. Okay. But it was a matter of, everybody at a conference says, hey, what do you do? Right. Well, I started with why before I ever knew Simon Sinek or, his book, Start With Why. I would say, hey, we have a foundation that helps families adopt children. And we fund that through real estate. And our investors love knowing they're a part of that, even though it doesn't affect their returns. And then obviously the conversation is very different than every other conversation they ever had about the market or the deal that somebody has or whatever, right? They just talked to 20 people. And now all of a sudden we're talking about adoption and families and children. And guess what? A week later, when I follow up, they remember that. They remember
Right.
that. And I started to see that happening, right? Again, the Lord just had a plan there. But it was different, right, than everything else they had heard. Then all of a sudden they're sharing about their children or grandchildren, something they're passionate about. And it's a different relationship that's immediately built because we're both sharing about something we're passionate about than just talking about the recent real estate deal or market or whatever that everybody else is talking about, right? So that helped me get started in a big way. And then the follow-up, right? Following up with people. After I would meet them at a conference, I would literally I might meet 10 or 15 people. I would go to the bathroom and I would Voxer myself, or just like a walkie-talkie app. I'd record myself talking about everybody I just met. Okay. And so I could remember as many details as possible, or I would take their business card and I would write down as many details about them as I possibly could. Right. And so then when I follow up with Nick, I can say, well, hey, how's that podcast going? Or have you got that podcast started yet? Or, right. So there was an immediate connection there, about something that we talked about the best I could. I didn't always do that perfect, but that helped, in a big way, just something simple like that. And then even if you have a virtual assistant that can help you with that, man, you can really scale that, then you're Voxer and you're telling them these details, right? So they're documenting it in your CRM and then following up with people, even faster. But those things, building those relationships were crucial early on to being able to raise money probably faster than most.
It's really inspiring, just being able to get out and form that many relationships that quickly to be able to make an impression on people. I also just love it's on the theme of doing things that 99% of people don't. Taking that next step to really make good notes on who it was that you were connecting with and showing the value. That's what it is, right? It's showing people that you actually care about them, to be able to connect with them again and actually remember details about their life.
Right.
That's huge in terms of building a meaningful network. One of the other pieces that I wanted to ask about with this, a lot of folks that we talk with have a passion for something bigger than themselves, whether that's a heart for adoption or, there's a number of fantastic causes, human trafficking, but obviously starting a nonprofit and sustaining that can be really difficult. I'm curious for you, how much of real estate is just like it's something that you're really, really passionate about versus how much of it is, hey, what I'm really passionate about is adoption, and real estate is the best vehicle that I could find to fund my vision and dreams for this adoption ministry. And if there was another vehicle that did that better, I probably would have gone after that. Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. And I think most of us, especially in my shoes, are tempted or to feel pressured to say, hey, no, real estate's a major passion. I'm so passionate about it, right? I agree with your question, though, in a sense that it's like, hey, if there was something else that would have helped us to fuel other passions faster, and I just knew that, well, I would have gone that route probably. Right. We love real estate. I love real estate. But still, we're very passionate about helping families adopt. We are, like, that is a major passion to be able to help, so like we do every second Monday of the month, we have a prayer time for families or anybody that wants to join through the foundation. And it's just a Zoom call. Anybody can join. We pray for adoption and other specific needs that families have. And like things like that, right? We're very passionate about. Another thing I've become very passionate about is mentoring young men or even adult men or older men to be courageous, what I call courageous men in the way that they lead in their home. And so that's why the personal brand started, and we'll probably even start another podcast around that specific thing, because I want men to be as focused on leading well at the dinner table as they do at the boardroom table, right? We just created a 7-day challenge leading men through creating a family mission statement, right? And just, helping get their family around a family mission statement, the importance of this mission statement, how to do that. Because we know that, hey, families that are surrounded by a cause like that together, or, just that cohesion that happens behind everybody having some ownership in something like that, goes a long ways. Right. It goes a long ways in just the life of the family. And I want my boys to see me lead that way. I want my girls to see me lead that way. Right. And I want to support my wife, right, as well in that way. And so I want to help other men to do the same thing. And so I'm very passionate about those things, even like creating that 7-day challenge. Like I love doing that. And that's free, we're just giving that away. But I love doing things like that. And the real estate business helps fund those things.
Yeah.
In a big way.
That's so good too, because, again, I think so many times we think business is a way to achieve freedom, get out of the 9 to 5, build wealth. And so often we look at it as the ends instead of the vehicle to really fuel the other things that we're called for or passionate about. So I love that. Now, you mentioned potentially starting another podcast. I want to actually back up a little bit and kind of take a little stroll down your journey in doing over 2,000 episodes. It's not every day. Well, first off, most podcasts end after 10 episodes. The fact that you are where you are, there has to be some nuggets of wisdom along that journey. But really, one thing I'd love to hear from you and have you hit on is that marathon versus sprint mentality. In America, we have this culture of everything's going to happen now. And I remember when you were on Bigger Pockets, you said something, and maybe you didn't even realize the fullest extent of it, but what it was: dig the wells before you need the water. And I think, that was, you were not 2,000 episodes in at that time. So you've continued to dig that well. But I'm just curious, in reflecting over the last few years, the conversations you've had, and then also the impact of, this game is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And how do you appropriately set expectations?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. It's definitely been a marathon, but I knew the consistent actions, like the right consistent actions, are going to lead to good results, right? And you can't be afraid of some failures, right? It's going to happen. As it Thomas Edison said, like the road to success is paved with failures, or something like that. It's going to happen, but how fast can I fail, right? And actually, a quote I just read recently. It's like, with ordinary talent and perseverance, like all things are attainable. That's a Thomas Buxton quote, I think, something like that. But so it's like ordinary talent, even, right? It's just like, but with extraordinary perseverance, right? I remember my grandmother teaching me the word perseverance, when I was like 5. And it's just so important, right? You don't have to be some genius, thankfully, and I'm a case of that. You don't have to be a genius to be able to go do something a little bit bigger, right? Early on with the podcast, you mentioned, it being a marathon, and it was, no doubt about it. It was, it's very difficult for me to go down there some days knowing, hey, I'm fixing to have to do 15 interviews back to back to back. It was draining, to say the least. But I did learn a lot. And I knew that was a path to meeting lots of great people in our industry. I knew it, right? So I had to just keep that in mind. But I also, if you haven't read the book 10X is Easier Than 2X, this is a great example of that. Dan Sullivan, Benjamin Hardy, a great, just thought-provoking book about that. But if I had done a weekly podcast from the beginning, I would have tried to have done it all myself. I would have said, you know what, I can edit the audio, I can edit the video, I'll figure it out, we'll save the money, and I'll be able to, I'll get it done. Well, I probably wouldn't have gotten it done, and I would have gotten frustrated, probably quit, okay? However, doing 7 times what everybody else was doing, even though a number of people in the industry told me I was crazy for doing a daily podcast. I mean, they did. They literally said, hey, that's crazy. Don't do that. And I talked to my mentor about it, and he's like, that's why you have to do it. That's why you have to do. So I needed that kick in the tail, right?
Yeah.
But
so right kind of mentor.
That's right. But by thinking differently, so I had to hire a team, right, to do all those things. I knew it was not possible for me to do all the editing and do everything for 7 shows a week, much less 1 show a week, but much less 7. So I had to hire the team, and then that also turned into almost my own accountability. Right? They had the 12 or 15 people lined up, like I had to show up. I can't cancel on 12 or 15 people. It would be crazy, right? So I would try to never do that, of course. But that turned into my own accountability and just built that system for them to have those people there and producing the podcast. And I just had to keep going. I almost didn't have a choice, to quit then. But that's when things started to happen too. It's like just the consistency, and everybody thought, oh, he'll quit 20 shows in, right? Or 50 shows in, or 100 shows in. It's crazy. Everybody called me crazy, right? I'd never syndicated a deal, but I'm doing the real estate syndication show. It makes no sense, right? How crazy is that? 2,000 shows later, you can say all you want. It doesn't make me any difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. It is really rare for anybody to break even into the triple digits on podcasts. So to be in the thousands is pretty remarkable. You mentioned the different opportunities and things that's opened up for you. We mentioned at the start of the show, part of why we started this podcast was because of your encouragement to folks to do so. Since you started, perhaps the podcasting game has changed a little bit. It does seem like there might be a bit more noise in the podcasting space now. Kind of the joke is everybody that you talk to has a podcast. I'm curious if your advice has changed there at all over the past couple of years, or if you still see real advantages to somebody who's just getting started in their entrepreneurial endeavors to get into podcasting. Maybe even if it's not a daily deal like what you were doing, but they wanted to do something once a week.
It hasn't changed. So your audience is going to be different than my audience, right? If there's very few podcasts that reach the top, right? It's just not even necessary. That's great if that happens, but it's not necessary to have a successful business or even successful podcast or a successful following, to be the top few podcasts. It's not necessary. And so, where else? And there are other ways, but, at least for podcasting, there's very few other ways where you can reach out to somebody that's way ahead of you and them give you 30 minutes to an hour of their time. It's just right. It's very different, right? It's very, hey, me inviting somebody on the show that's, I had, the founder of Zillow on, my goodness, his name's just left me. Anyway, the founder of Zillow on Show 2000, it's like he was happy to be on because he knew it was Show 2000.
Cool. Yeah.
Right? When else would he have given me an hour of his time? It wouldn't have happened. Right? It would not have happened. And so it's like, when do you get to network with people like that? Some of the most valuable times on the podcast have been like the 5 or 10 minutes after the show is over, right? Having those few minutes to just, hey, the recording's off, ask a few questions of somebody, right? Learn from them, build a little bit of relationship, right? Many people have become mentors and they don't even know it to me because of that 10 minutes. That they gave me, or that 5 minutes even after the interview. Or then you then also have a reason to reach back out later, right? Hey, thanks for being on the show. I'm so grateful. I just wonder if I could ask you one other question, or about something you said or whatever. Hey, I saw you're promoting a book. I appreciate you being on the show. I'd love to help promote that. But, also I wondered if you could answer this one thing, what other platform allows you to do that, to get connected to that many people. But remember, if you have 2,000 or even 200 true followers, there is a lot of value to be had there, right? You can add a lot of value to those people, but guess what? There's a lot of value, a lot more than what most take advantage of. We have not taken good advantage of that. It's been more a networking opportunity, over the years than anything. But where else can you do that, right? And have a reason to reach out to people that would normally, never give you a minute of their time or be able to. Really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a, I mean, all of that resonates with, that's totally been our experience and the main benefit, I think, to the show. And this conversation right here is an example of that, the honor of being able to talk with you. It's also amazing. You talk about even just having like 200 true fans. There does seem to be something unique about the format of podcasting where, because you get to spend an hour once a week, or in your case, once a day, in people's ears, they feel like they really start to get to know you. And it seems to be a really great way to build rapport and trust. And I guess I'm curious if that's been your experience as well, or maybe to open the question up a bit more generally, what are other ways that you have cultivated that trust and likability with folks? Because that does seem to be such a huge part of your business and the success that you've experienced.
No doubt about it. I mean, it's the know, like, trust, right? People have to know you before they can like you. People have to like you before they trust you. They have to trust you before they're going to hand you $50,000 to $100,000 or $1 million, right, to invest with you. And I do believe it was our mission that set us apart from the very beginning. No doubt about it. I mean, that set me apart. And again, I didn't plan it that way, but I started to see that work, right? In a big way. And that helped just LifeBridge in general to be known, like we're known for adoption, I mean, it seems kind of crazy in the real estate business, right? To be known for adoption, but that set us apart in a big way. The podcast, helped do that. Like you just said, like people hear me every day. Right, or they used to. Actually, at Show 2000, it was Spencer Raskoff, by the way, founder of Zillow, and we transitioned to weekly after that. It's highest and best use of my time type of thing, like figuring that out, and moving towards the personal brand some, and maybe even a personal podcast, and around courageous men, and really even more philanthropy, and giving back in those ways. But what would happen, Nick, is when I would start, I would be on investor calls and I would be asking investors questions about themselves, who they are, what they love to do. I love asking, like, what do you love to do for fun? Like getting those personal things out, and it gives me more reason to reach back up and say personal things as well and follow up, right? Instead of just about investing. But often at the ends of a conversation, they might say, well, I didn't ask you anything, Whitney, but I feel like I already know you. Like that's what they would say. I feel like I already know you, right? And like that pushes me so much further ahead in this trust relationship, right? This know, like, trust relationship is that they've heard my voice every day while they're walking the dog or at the gym, or they already know my story. They already know about the adoption mission. They've heard so much of that. They feel like they already know me. Right. I do that. There's people I listen to all the time that I just feel like I know them, even though I don't. Right. And that's something that the podcast has done in a big way.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I mean, I'm a testimony to that. I mean, as I've listened to various episodes, listened to your story, and instantly it was like, I got to have this guy on. Whitney, one thing I wanted to ask, as we reflect on the episodes, you mentioned you had to put a team in place. You've had to have mentors to have larger goals. It's all people. It's all relationships. I think statistically they say 90 to 95% of business owners never break the $1 million in annual revenue mark. I think it's the classic solopreneur. For somebody who's in the grind and they are working a job that they've built for themselves, do you got any advice or practical steps for them to take to get, maybe it's thinking bigger, maybe it's, hey, these are some steps you can take to get out of that, you're a slave to your own business, and you can start building something bigger so that you can go towards the things you're passionate about, the philanthropy, the different things like that.
I love talking about this. It's so important that you can delegate and start giving things to somebody else. If you really want to scale, it has to happen. It has to happen. If you want to be as good at home or leading your family and as you are in business and being successful in business, and you have to be able to hire people and delegate. But here's the thing. You have to figure out what you can hand off, and you have to be good with those things being done, it's, let's say, 80 to 90% of what you could do. Right. And sometimes, and at least initially, oftentimes or over time, those things are even going to be done better than what you could have done, right? Depending on the task and what, the role that you're hiring for. But what I'd like to have people do in the very beginning is write down everything you do, like in 15-minute increments for a few days. Usually you'll know this within about 2 days, but if you did this for like 2 weeks, it like you'll figure out things that, wait a minute, I just spent 30 minutes on scrolling Instagram, right? Or whatever, or I just spent an hour on email, and 2/3 of it was junk email, that I didn't even open, or like all that can be delegated to somebody else, right? Every bit of that. And so writing those things down to figure out, okay, what's the top 20% of things that's producing the most for me? Because the top 20% is going to produce 80% of your income, right? Like what are those things, and how can I have a path to just focusing on those things and handing off the other things as fast as possible? I'll tell people, hire an assistant today, like as soon as possible, right? Maybe you do that exercise for a few days, and then you go find somebody that can be an assistant for you, because it's never been easier to have somebody to help support you than it is today. And so like I just did an interview with another person in the Philippines this morning early, and so I bet we've hired 30 people in the Philippines, over the last number of years. But typically it's for a very specific skill set, right? That I need them, whether it's marketing or editing or whatever it may be, right? Podcasting. But I want them to take something off my plate. And typically they have a skill set where they can do it better than me anyway, right? And especially over a little bit of time, they're definitely doing it better than I could have anyway, right? But it's a mindset shift too, of thinking, well, no, I've got to be the one to respond to all of those emails. Well, no, actually, it may take you 3 or 4 days to get back to some of these people. And if somebody else on your team knew how to respond, well, guess what? Then they got back in 5 minutes. That's even better service, right, for that client or that investor. Or there are specific things that I need to respond to personally, but most of the time not, right? And we build out, for email, for instance, like there's some steps, or there's a process that my assistant goes through. And she has I think it's called the stack method. If you want to look it up, I think it's free. But we follow most of the stack method. It's like she tags things where there's an email that's going to take me more than 5 minutes to respond to, or where there's something that I need to do, or if it's urgent, or something I have to reply to. Or so if I'm standing in the airport and I've got 10 minutes, well, I won't go to the emails that take more than 5 minutes, but man, the other ones that I can reply to, well, I can just sit there and knock out a number of emails, right? But I don't even have to look at the junk emails, right? None of those are even there. Or somebody else asking about how to log into the investor portal. Well, no, she's already forwarded that to the team member that can help that investor immediately. I did not have to be involved in that, right? And so, but it's finding things like that throughout your entire day and week that you can hand off to somebody else. And I've just been on this constant battle. I feel like I'm looking at my calendar so many times throughout the day, and with the lens of, okay, what's next? What else can I cut? And that was even a big decision in going from daily to weekly for the podcast. Like, you know what? This has been highest and best use for a long time, or at least early on, but now it's not, and that was hard to figure out, do I just want to keep this thing going forever? As good as that sounds, it's just not highest and best use, right, for me to do that. And so that's been a big relief, right? That's relieved a lot more time for other things. But write those things down. What is the 20% of tasks that's producing 80% of your results? It's 80-20 rule. What is that? And have you taken the time to go through that? And then you have to get past the thought of, well, I'm just going to have to train that person. And then I hear this all the time. And it's just not going to work out. And then I'm just going to train somebody else. And well, guess what? That is true. that is going to happen. It may take 3 people, before you get to somebody that actually works out. But if you don't hire the first one, you're not going to get to that third one. And by the third one, that first one will have taught you a lot, even if it's bad things, and the second one will have taught you a lot. And by that third one, you're going to be a lot different boss, a lot different leader. You will have learned a lot about hiring and will be able to hire somebody better, right? You'll have better processes already in place because of these lessons that you've learned. But if you don't hire the first one, you can't get to the third one. right? And so let's get started as fast as we can, but start getting some of those things off your plate. So I can't push people fast enough to make the first hire. I use onlinejobs.ph a lot. John Jonas is a friend. He's the guy that started that. He was on the show just not too long ago. And we've hired some amazing people in the Philippines, to say the least. They're very dedicated for the most part.
That's awesome. No, and and I just want to follow up with that, because you're talking delegation, you're talking time management. One of the things you said earlier you're really passionate about is putting the guardrails up to ensure you continue to press into the things that matter most. Through your journey, what are some guardrails that you're putting up today to make sure you're not losing your soul amidst the business pursuits?
Love that question, because it can be so consuming, right? I mean, like it is hard to shut it off when you're an entrepreneur. It's like I wake up in the middle of the night, my mind is going, and sometimes I just have to get up. I'm laying there rolling around. I'm like, well, I don't want to keep my wife awake at 2 a.m. I'll just get up. And sometimes I just have to go write some stuff down, whatever, and think for a minute and get some of that out of there. And then maybe I go back to bed then. Right? It's hard. My whole point is it's hard to shut it off. But so a couple rules that my wife and I have set in place is very consistent date nights. We've not always done that or been able to. But I would say even if you can't afford to technically go out to dinner, you can still have a date at home, but it's being very intentional with that time, right? And my kids need my wife and I to be very strong in our marriage, right? And it's a biblical mandate. I feel like for me to lead, in that way, and so we have it's on the calendar. Our dates, and even my assistant helps schedule our dates, right? And so there's even accountability, through that. Something else that we've started doing is one-on-ones with the kids and scheduling that. So like there's a book, the family board meeting. Jim Shields, I've had him on the podcast. We did a series about it. I gave the book away to everybody that listened, or to anybody that wanted it. It's a really short read. However, he just lays out a simple formula. Hey, schedule once a month with every child. It needs to be at least 4 hours. There's no electronics involved. You do something fun. It doesn't have to be extravagant or very expensive. It could be a hike, right? But it's one-on-one time with that child. And then you go, say, have a fun snack or a meal together or something like that. So you're encouraging conversation and relationship, right? Even from a young age. And so I've been doing that with my boys for probably a couple of years now. And they look forward to that, right? They say, Dad, when's the next one, right? Or we already have it scheduled. And they're excited about that next time. Even my daughter, she just had her first one at 5. And she was excited about it. She's seen the boys doing this. Like, when do I get my one-on-one time, right? But it's a time of building the relationship. Right. And so guess what? 5 years from now, hey, we've been doing this a long time, and they know, guess what? They're going to get that one-on-one time with mom or dad. There's a time for asking questions that they wouldn't ask other times, say when their siblings are around, right? They know they're going to have this time of just building relationship and no judgment, right? And they're going to get answers to their questions, and whatever their questions are, we always try to give an answer. We always try to speak truth. Right. We always want it to be truthful, no matter what their question is. We want them to know, hey, for their entire life, they can ask us anything, and we're going to give them an honest answer. Right. But it starts in it. We're building those relationships. And so another thing is we try. I'll confess, I'm not always great at this, but like no phones after, a certain time in the after day or at the dinner table, things like that. Again, I'm guilty as anybody, but it's a goal to be able to be focused, right? If that thing's vibrating in my pocket, it distracts me, right? It takes my mind, especially if there's a lot going on in the business. And so it's helpful just for it to be away, me just be focused on the child or my wife or whoever's in front of me, right? And I heard a guy say one time for marriages, every day, 5 minutes within 5 feet. And so make sure you're within 5 feet of your spouse every day for at least 5 minutes and saying, hey, how are you today? What happened? Or what else, right? How are you? How are you? How are you? What about that? And just showing care. And that daily check-in, because I'm telling you, you can be so caught up in business that before you know it, it's been 2 weeks and you haven't really connected, right, with your spouse. And so anyway, that was maybe have been more than you were asking for, but that's just a few things that I want to be famous at home, right? That's the legacy you're going to leave. I don't care how successful you are in business, right? It's these relationships that are going to matter for eternity, ultimately.
Yeah. What's that line? The only one who's going to remember the dinners that you missed working late is your wife and children. Nobody else is going to be remembering those. And so, you say, maybe that's more than we want. It's like, no, keep giving it to me. This is gold. I really, really appreciate the wisdom, the guardrails that you've put in place. And I think that lands on all of our listeners, no matter what stage of life that they're in. You got to protect what matters. And at the end of our days, when we're looking back, it is the relationships and the loved ones that we're going to wish that we had the most time with. I even appreciate you sharing that, as you think back on your first year of marriage. And it's kind of like, yeah, the triplexes were cool, but that was such a unique season that you kind of wish that there would have been more capacity and focus on just that. So I know there's a lot of takeaways for our listeners. I know we're also kind of drawing nigh on time here. Nick, you got a couple of gold nugget questions you want to close us out with?
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, I think just through the course of conversation, we end up covering most of these, but I'm going to throw them at you anyways, Whitney.
Please.
So one of the things we talk about a lot here is the 5 F's of Abundant Journey. They work together, but we got family, faith, fitness, finance, and future. What's one of those here? We're halfway through 2024. What's one of those you're really honing in on for the rest of the year, and how are you looking to grow in that?
Yeah. I talked about the personal brand a little bit and really helping. I want to help men to be what I call courageous men and really lead what I say a legacy of true wealth. And true wealth meaning, hey, it's bigger than just your personal finances, right? It's leaving the legacy of those relationships, and ultimately, I want people to know that, hey. Whitney is known for loving the Lord, right? And man, the Lord was honored in how he led not just his business, but also his family or at church. And one way, so you talked about, I'm going to mention this because I feel like it affects so many of those things, our faith and our family, but is that mission statement, like I mentioned earlier. And, so I just created like a 7-day challenge that people can go through, but we're in the middle of this process with our family as well, again, or we've talked about it some in the past and had one, but I'm trying to, as our kids have gotten older, I want to incorporate them again. Right. And I want our younger kids to be more involved, right? Because they need to feel a sense of ownership, but it's even teaching them, hey, this can be the compass, right? That helps guide our family's decisions, our actions, and that they all feel just ownership in creating, say, some family core values, right? And just that we come together on those thoughts and just like that's going to help us to be stuck together as a family, right? And it's something that we can go back to when there's difficulty in the family or decisions that need to be made, or we're trying to figure out, hey, what's this next step that we need to take? Well, we can look to that mission statement that we all agreed on, and we can say, hey, does this align with that? Do we go this direction? Does that align with that, or does this align better? Or maybe even how you treated your sibling there. Does that align with our mission statement? And so that's something that I've just been more focused on lately, and even helping others to do that. But just refine that, go through that, and then even have a ceremony at the end that kind of helps us all to officially adopt that mission statement, right? And read it together, and even have it on the walls where we're headed anyway. But it's that it's obviously it's connected to our faith. It's it binds our family together, and if we're not tied at home, guess what? The business is not going to be tied either. Right. And so we're so focused on having that mission statement for the business, but what about for our main unit here? Our family, right? That we're leading as men.
Man, I love that. And I think, honestly, where my mind goes is as we grew up and then are now fathers and parents, my mind goes to creating that culture now and planting those seeds. What impact will they have for our kids when they're
That's
parents? Right. And really that's true generational change. So I love that answer. Next one here. Why is it important to have an abundance versus scarcity mindset? And really, how does that impact your family, your business, and what you guys are doing?
I feel like it's a difference in just not living out of fear, right? I mean, it's Corey Ten Boom has a quote like, worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow, but it empties today of its strength, something like that. And so it's like, man, we can worry ourselves literally to death. Right. And just, the things that could happen, and be so, well, you know what, things could happen and it could be really good, but if you don't try, if you don't, go after that, like you're not going to know. Right. And even, obviously money helps do lots of things that you couldn't do otherwise. Right. But it's not everything. It's not happiness. It's not, it will not bring fulfillment. And we've all seen the actors who are multi millionaires who commit suicide and all these things, right, that are just horrible. Well, guess what? They weren't fulfilled, right, in any way. So I want to have an abundance mentality, but in the right direction, right? I don't want to be fearful, but I want to know, hey, the Lord has got big things for LifeBridge Capital, right? And it's not just so Whitney can have another house or vehicle or whatever, but no, it's so 50 more children can be adopted, right? Or whatever. We can help this many men, to lead their families well, or things like that.
I love it. Absolutely. The greater why, and that continues to fuel you guys. Next one here. What's a dream or goal that you have that you've not been able to make happen yet?
There's so many things, but one that came to mind that I feel like fits well here is taking my boys horse riding away from the house. And it seems strange, but we ride horses together here at the house, and I'm trying to get them experienced enough here before we say go ride somewhere else. But I'm looking forward to the one-on-one time, right, with them while riding, trail riding, and maybe them even competing some, whatnot. But over the years, right, we talked about that one-on-one that I like to do with them, and I'm looking forward to being able to take them places, but really the conversations and the one-on-one time with them, and just watching them become young men. Anyway, that's just a goal that I feel like is more legacy related, more family related, more important than say another 100 units or another 1,000 units or 10,000 units, or that will happen. But I don't need 10,000 units, right, to really focus on what's most important.
I love it. Love it. Last one here. At the end of your life, what do you hope you'll be remembered for?
Loving the Lord. I just hope that it's obvious that, like I mentioned this earlier, but I hope that it's obvious that when somebody remembers me, that, man, he was so generous with his time. Or every time he talked to me, he encouraged me in the Lord, right? He encouraged my walk with the Lord, or he pointed me towards truth, or, the way he operated was different because he loved the Lord, or he treated investors this way because he loved the Lord. He treated tenants this way, or his employees or his family this way because he served, a God that was amazing.
Yeah. I love it. I'm so grateful that we get to be benefactors of your generosity of time and wisdom and everything that you've shared with us here. I know I'm walking away from this conversation extremely encouraged and with several things to sit and continue to ponder the rest of the day, the rest of the week. So I can't wait to listen back to this episode as well. For our listeners that do want to connect with you, I know you got a lot going on, and there's a lot of different streams in which, LifeBridge Capital and it's Omna, right? The adoption ministry.
Omna, OMNAH.
And then, of course, now the Courageous Men and personal brand stuff that you're launching. Anyhow, what are kind of the best spots that people should go if they want to learn more about any of those things that you're doing?
whitneysewell.com. That is the place to learn about all those things, or a lot about me personally. And then that's also where you'll learn more about eventually the Courageous Men brand and the 7-day challenge I've mentioned a couple times, and helping walk people through that. That'll be launched probably in the next couple weeks. And then obviously, LifeBridge Capital is our business, but you can learn more about that at whitneysewell.com as well.
Well, listeners, there are links in the show notes, so do be sure to check those out. Follow along with everything that Whitney's doing. I'm sure that there's going to be something that resonates and meets you where you're at in your journey. And we will be back very soon with another episode. But Whitney, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's wonderful to connect with you.
Thank you, guys. Honored to be on your show. Love your purpose, your mission behind the show as well.